Hello and welcome to today's webinar from Emergency Services Times. I'm Catherine Levin and I'm the editor of Emergency Services Times. After a very successful emergency services show last month, we now return to talk about key topics that affect you in the sector. And today we're going to be looking at fire prevention, 20 years on from the introduction of home fire safety checks. We're doing this today with our partner Aico. The webinar is a chat, there's no presentation, no slides, it's a conversation that leaves you inspired to find out more. We have a Q&A function on our webinar software, and I've recently discovered that if you press the arrow when you see somebody else writing a question, it will upvote it, so you can get that to the top of the list. I will try and get to as many questions as I can during the session today. You'll also receive CPD accreditation from us for attending. You'll get this by email after this session today, and if you're watching Catch Up, you'll get it later in the month. Our plan today is to run for 50 minutes in total. So let's get started. Wait for my panelists to join me on screen. Lovely, thank you. I'm delighted today to introduce Andy Speake, Mark Thomas and Jed Devereux. Andy is the National Technical Manager for Aico. Mark is Area Manager for Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service, where he is the Fire Prevention Lead. And Jed is a Strategic Community Health Lead for the National Fire Chiefs Council. Welcome to you all. Now, I'd just like to say before we get started today that this has been incredibly popular today. We've had our second highest registration, so I'm really pleased to tell our speakers that today that there's so much interest in what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to start with the strategic context. So what I'd like us to do is to ask Mark, first of all, to tell us why 2004 is so significant in terms of fire safety.
Thanks, Catherine, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. And yeah, 2004 was really significant, wasn't it, in terms of fire and rescue? I suppose looking back with others who may have begun their careers in the early 90s, our Bible was the Fire Services Act, 1947. And there wasn't a great deal in the Fire Services Act that covered off fire prevention. Section 11F is certainly the piece of legislation that I recall, and it was a really woolly piece of legislation, and it just said that a fire brigade must give some advice around fire prevention if they're so asked to do so, and that really was it. Fast forward then to 2004, and prior to 2004, probably around the turn of the millennium, many services, ours included, we'd already embarked on some of the fire prevention strategies, you know, going out, having conversations in the community, fitting smoke alarms to many properties. That was followed very soon after by the Act of 2004, which really gave us, an impetus to do something differently around home safety and prevention of fire in the home. And it was quite specific, really, in that it talked about the fire and rescue service must make provision for the purpose of promoting fire safety in its area. It talked about fire services must provide information, publicity and encouragement for people to stay safe and alive in their homes from fire. And also it talked to the fact that the Fire and Rescue Authority must provide for the giving advice about how people can prevent fires and similarly restrict their spread in buildings. So it was a real key piece of legislation. But as I say, by that time, many people, some of whom will be on the call, we'd already started to have some of these conversations around prevention. And, you know, going back to the early 90s, there was a challenge in terms of fire. There was, you know, we did have many accidental fires. We had many fatalities, you know, as a result of those accidental dwelling fires. And we needed to do something about it. And certainly at the turn of the century and following the implementation of the legislation in 2004, things have changed.
Brilliant, thank you. That's a really helpful summary, taking us back in time there. So one of the other things that happened in 2004 was the government of the time, Labour government as it was then, provided money to fire and rescue services to encourage the concept of home fire safety visits, or home fire risk checks as they called them then, providing £25 million to fire and rescue services to get to 1.25 million vulnerable households. That was the intention at the time, and give it a real boost along with that duty. I looked at some statistics and it said that in 2004 there were 61,000 dwelling fires in Great Britain. and 20 years later, that's gone down to 32,000. So they've halved in those 20 years, which I think is pretty significant. So in terms of where we are today, so we've got people doing home fire safety visits. They still happen. We're going to go on to talk about that. But Andy, I just wanted to ask you in terms of, I've talked about Great Britain statistics there, but specifically in Scotland, innovation that you've seen from Aico in terms of improving fire prevention over that 20-year period. Could you just bring us up to date a little bit on the sort of Scottish side of things?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so it's not just Scotland. It's different in all the different home nations. What our requirements are in England to Northern Ireland to Wales and Scotland at one end of the extreme. Whereas following Grenfell, they had a consultation looking at different tenure of property, what the requirements are, looking at the building regulations. Apologies, my lights has gone off. And then after that, they realised that it wasn't right that somebody in one particular type of property was better protected than somebody in a different property. So they introduced a level playing field for all properties to have a certain level of protection. And the rather extreme move of what Scotland did, quite extreme even as far as Europe's considered, is they extended that legislation to owner-occupied properties. So every single dwelling, domestic property in Scotland needs to have smoke alarms, heat alarms, CO alarm, and to quite a high level of protection. And considering Scotland they did have the highest rate of fire deaths throughout the UK, that number is already beginning to drop quite significantly. So it's has had a big impact.
Yes, interesting. Okay, thank you. So that gives us a sense of where the kind of position that we find ourselves in. So we're going to talk about home fire safety visits. We've referenced that a couple of times. In the last year that I have available, 22 to 23, there were just over 600,000 of these carried out by fire rescue services and their partners. So Mark, as our frontline representative on this webinar, could you just share with our audience what home fire safety visits is, what that looked like in 2004, what it looks like today, and how that helps fire and rescue services keep their communities safe? How does it fit with the rest of the duties that you have? So just a sense of what that is like for you in your service.
Sure. I think originally it's fair to say, Catherine, that most services adopted a blunderbuss, almost a scattergun approach. You know, there was a real sort of, there was a void out there, wasn't there? You know, people weren't necessarily, weren't necessarily fire safety looked like. So it was for the services or the brigades, as they might have been at the time, to go into people's homes and to have conversations. And I recall vividly our own service, you know, in '99, just walking streets, knocking on doors, fitting smoke alarms, giving a leaflet, and then coming away and doing it, after and after and after. And that's really evolved since then. I'm very privileged in terms of being able to see how it was and how it is now, because we've moved forward as a sector so well in terms of, you know, targeting those people who are vulnerable. I think, I certainly recall as a child growing up, there was always this theory that, you know, fire doesn't discriminate and, you know, anyone can, you know, suffer a fire. But we soon worked out, once we started to analyse the data, and lots of data was coming in, that fire does discriminate, you know, and it discriminates from area to area, from ward to ward, from service to service. So once we bring that data down, we're able to understand, you know, those people who we target. The home fire safety visit, in its rawest form at the moment, is exactly that. It's people going over the threshold into somebody's home and to give them advice around what will keep them safe and alive from fire. Equally, you know, we talk about smoke alarms. We fit smoke alarms in the homes of the most vulnerable. And it's really about that sort of that product. Everything else can then be built around that, but certainly the evolution of the home fire safety visit from where it was is absolutely, you know, it's a real success story, and we look to future success as well, Catherine.
Yes, and it's that vulnerability question which brings me want to bring in Jed at this point. So Jed, you became involved with the fire service in 2014 when you moved from Public Health England. What brought you from that environment to this one, and what did you find when you saw that in terms of how it was dealing with vulnerable people? What was your impression at that time?
Yeah, hi. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you. Yeah, My background is over 26 years within local government, working across environmental health, regeneration projects, health inequalities main projects. I came in on the back of the Black Report, which looked at index multiple deprivation. So it connects back to what Mark has just said in terms of us actually being able to align fire risk with a whole range of demographic risks and make sure that we, if you like, fine tune that approach. So we moved from 2004 in terms of what was very much a buildings focus to where we currently are in 2024, which is very much which we're going to go on to talk about, a person-centred approach. My background in Public Health England was to actually work across all emergency services to see how they could contribute in the widest sense in terms of the NHS forward plan as it was then, with a focus on prevention as opposed to cure. These are really topical issues for us currently today, and we'll talk about the future. But it's not lost upon me that we're revisiting that now within the NHS 10-year plan around the sort of agenda for prevention. And my coming across to Fire and Rescue Services coincided with then the Chief Executive of NHS England, Sir Simon Stevens, calling a Fire and Health Summit with the then lead for CFOA, Peter O'Reilly from Greater Manchester, the chief as he was at the time. In terms of looking at the connectivity between our co-joined agendas, really, in terms of the work that Fire and Rescue Services has done to prioritise prevention and the work that the NHS needed still to do to prioritise prevention. At that stage, less than 1% of the NHS's entire budget was spent on prevention. It's not changed dramatically, I might add, but at the same time, it was a really sort of stark reminder to us that there was a commonality between what we were doing within the fire sector, the journey we were on, and also the journey that the NHS were on, and looking at the crossovers. And the main crossovers were around the exposure to increased fire risk because of a range of long-term conditions. The most obvious one being around mobility and frailty. So that's where I came into the conversation, and I've worked for the last 10 years in terms of supporting both at a national level, but also really importantly, because we're a member-led organisation, our local member Fire and Rescue Services, to actually make sense of the connections that are possible, not just across Fire and Rescue Services, but with the broader public and private sector.
Excellent, thank you. It's really interesting to see you coming in with that insight from the health sector, and then spending so long within fire now, those 10 years, and we'll come on to talk about the safe and well and the person-centred framework to show the evolution of the kind of work that you've been doing. I'd just like to ask Andy around that period. So in terms of home fire safety visits, so Marcus described in terms of the, what did you call it, the blunderbuss approach of, you know, just stick them up, just get them out there because we've been given them, to a more nuanced, data-driven approach based on many factors, which show that fire does discriminate, as you say accurately. So Andy, in terms of the smoke alarms and the actual technology over that period and what people were using in 2004, where we are now, what are the big changes for you as the supplier into the sector?
Loads of changes. Yeah, probably the biggest change is down to sensor type. Historically, ionization alarms used to be the most popular, and they were very good at what they did, but they were arguably a bit too good. They were very sensitive, so notoriously almost give smoke alarms a bad reputation for burning toast. They would alarm, opening ovens potentially could alarm it, even blowing a candle out could. They were very, very sensitive, whereas now we tend to use optical alarms, photoelectric. We use multi-sensors, and not only have we got a lot better and broader at the detection, but we've also got a lot better at minimising that potential of nuisance alarms. So that's probably the one end of the spectrum. Well, I'm sure we'll probably talk about technology later on, but yeah, there's the other end. There's a lot more to do as well.
With all that choice, Andy, in terms of services knowing what alarm for what purpose, and because obviously we're talking very much about inside the home, but there's also the whole alarms that go into communal areas under the RRO, different spaces. So is it quite complex now?
Not for a consumer, essentially, no. A smoke alarm is a smoke alarm. So whereas a consumer might have purchased a smoke alarm from their local whatever shop, and previously it would have been an ionization, that same smoke alarm is more likely going to be an optional type alarm. So from a consumer perspective, it hopefully it's still simple enough. From anybody who is specifying, whether that be a landlord, fire and rescue, anybody like that, they have the opportunity and to take a more informed decision and potentially be a little bit more strategic over what technology is best suitable for a particular application, really. But it's very similar, though. The other question you mentioned there is regarding, we're focusing on homes and domestic products, but a lot of the same technology is used in commercial products as well. There's differences to how we make a sound and the type of sound we output, but the actual sensor technology is very, very similar across both industries.
Okay, thank you. I have a question here from Joanna Foster, who actually worked with London Fire Brigade many years ago, so it's nice to see that she's watching us today. She's asking us about HFSV practitioners, so the people actually going into people's homes as lone workers. What does she say? It's quite long. Panel's thoughts on what could be addressed at a national level around lone workers. Key theme for supervision when they're working alone in people's homes in the absence of risk assessments, personal safety training for lone workers, and lone workers' devices. So something around lone workers. Mark, is that something you and your service look at, how you protect the people who are going in? Because it's not just frontline firefighters doing this, there's a whole range of different staff who go in and partners too. So what are you thinking around the whole lone worker side of things?
Really good question, Catherine, given the numbers of visits that we're making as a sector, as an industry. So it is a really good question, and yes, we do address lone working. So you're quite right. We have almost 2 tier of home fire safety visits. So the initial home fire safety visit is by a crew. They will never be lone working because the nature of being in a crew, there's more than one. We do have also a specialist team of advocacy officers who will go into people's properties, but they will risk assess it, as we say. And if there's any indications on notes that we receive from partners, etc., then we're able to introduce measures. And equally, it's something that we have discussed strategically in respect of keeping people safe going into the homes of others, so that we use technology to support us with that as well. And absolutely, we wouldn't put our staff into risk. Neither should we can consider that throughout the sector.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Just another question here on the Scotland. So should all UK nations have the same approach as Scotland? Is it time to move to LD1, which I think is a type of smoke alarm? I'm not sure. As the basic standard with the increased ignition sources in bedrooms and for vulnerable people. Is that something, Andy, you can answer for us?
Happy to jump in on that one. Yeah, we get that a lot. Our technical line probably not. I don't know what percentage, but a large percentage of the calls we get are from installers, contractors asking, what do I need to install where? And it's not even a simple answer, because you've got the legislation at one end, and then you've got your British standards at another end, and somewhere in between you might have your building regulations, and then there's other complexities such as is it short-term let, Airbnb, is it HMO? It's quite complex. I work in it, and trying to keep on top of it is quite challenging, and then it keeps changing. And then Scotland's approach is simple. They've brought the legislation in line with what the standards say. We're a couple of little changes. So the building regs still say mains powered, whereas the new legislation in Scotland allows battery, but it still has to be a long life, tamper-proof, sealed battery cell. So 10-year plus typically they won't be. They still have to be interconnected. So it's a really high level of protection. And currently what Scotland's doing is almost the equivalent of LD2. So that's kitchen, living room, typically kitchen, living room, and hallways, landing, circulation spaces. But the other point in that question was, should we go LD1? So that's introducing alarms in all spaces. And yeah, the question had a good point in it. That we are seeing more and more fires in bedrooms and other locations. And I'm sure others on this call can comment on that better than I can. But yeah, we're hearing the same as well.
Thank you. And just to pick up this last question before we move on to safe and well visits, which is this kind of evolution of the home fire safety visit concept. Kevin Dodd asks us about what information can be provided by the fire service to housing associations. He's just about to start working with one to strengthen the message. What can they do? So that's it's about partnerships, isn't it, that question? So how are fire and rescue services working in partnership with housing providers and others to get the messages out? So Mark, what's that look like in Merseyside at the moment? What kind of thing are you doing that Kevin could learn from?
again, another really good question, and another key area of our business in terms of trying to deliver home safety. There's a lot of social housing stock, which means that there are registered social landlords who we work with really closely. So we may have a conference locally, we may engage with our RSLs locally. As an example, very recently, as an emerging issue around lithium-ion batteries and certainly scooters and bicycles, we were able to talk to all of our registered social landlords and to use, their outlets, their networks, to talk to people who live in their properties. So we do have really good partnership arrangements in place, equally with our colleagues in health. As with everything, we are challenged in certain respects around data and what we can and can't share with individuals. But when it's down to the safety of the people in their property, then we're really, clearly we're really passionate about reaching those individuals. So yeah, a really good question. I know that Jed might talk to some of the online home fire safety work that's been going on through the National Fire Chiefs Council, just in respect of engaging partners to support people who are able to access an online home safety check. I guess just before Jed does come in on that point, the real difficult bit is those people who live in rented properties who are under the radar. So for us, those are the real sort of risk areas, and those are the people who we really need to be engaging with. So keeping lines of communications open with our partners, whether it's police, education, health, or RSLs, really key to us, Catherine. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Jed, just before you come in, it's interesting that there's a follow-up question which is around the scope within home fire safety visits to address escape information in blocks of flats and false alarms, and the problem that they cause in those environments. I wonder, in terms of the development of the home fire safety visit, and Jed, I'll come to you to answer this, and moving into that kind of safe and well, thinking about it more about the person rather than the place. Are you thinking about that wider environment which people live, going beyond the front door? That's my question.
Well, by all means. I mean, that's the very simple answer. It's a really good question. And it's not lost upon us that we might have many protection colleagues on the call today. And we see this as two ends of prevention. So we need to do away from a sort of siloed approach that some services had adopted previously, of prevention in one office and protection in another office. Specialist housing and specialist housing guidance is a really good example of this, which is long overdue to actually be sort of refreshed in terms of the actual needs of the individuals, the type of housing, the type of individual that lives within that house. Prior to high-rise incidents in London, less than 3% of people in high-rise buildings had received a safe and well visit. So it's how we unintentionally discriminate in terms of the type of housing that we're in and how we actually look at that sort of going forward. What I really want to come into is the primary question there. The housing sector is a huge sector for us to actually be collaborating with and actually working with. We've recently done some work with the primary housing authorities and the Home Office to make sure that we can communicate and we can spread the word in terms of the National Online Home Fire Safety Check, which is now being used by over 92% of all English fire and rescue services. It will, in the next couple of weeks, be adopted by Wales and is already currently available in Northern Ireland. It complements our Scottish colleagues, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, who have a similar model. So for the first time, we're going to have a standardised online home fire safety check, of which housing as partners and as referral partners are really being encouraged to actually use, both in terms of their own understanding, the understanding of their workers, but also in terms of the tenants that they have in their properties. But I do go back to Mark's point in terms of sort of private renting is probably one of the areas where we probably do need to actually strengthen our sort of connectivity with landlords.
Yes, it's interesting. On the home fire safety bits of doing it online, are you finding that individual services are adding it within their own website and branding it so that it's special to their area, or are they going with a generic, this is a government thing? How does it work?
It's branded entirely it's seamless. It's branded entirely on their website. So for a member of the public actually accessing Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Services, Merseyside, Staffordshire, or wherever, it will pop up as their sort of like their site. It's
And do you
operated
have
by
any sense of take-up? Sorry, Jed, do you have any sense of
yeah,
take-up?
yeah, take-up. So in an 18-month period, it's probably now at 100,000 in terms of online home fire safety checks. And of those, we've got a real sort of trajectory in terms of some of our partners working with us to actually use it as a risk stratified way of actually referring people into a fire and rescue service. And we're seeing really sort of like good user satisfaction with that as well. So it really enables us to provide, if you go right back to 2004, that universal approach that we need to provide really good quality advice, fire prevention advice to all aspects of our population.
So the days of the fire kills branded leaflets that you'd leave behind, are they gone? So no more of those?
Not entirely gone, but it was not lost upon us that when we moved back to the Home Office, one of the biggest requests of the sector was to move towards a digitalised sort of platform in terms of fire prevention and sort of safety information.
Okay. So we have a question here about mental health, so the link between mental health and fire risk. So panel think that embedding mental health partnerships within prevention services has value. And this brings us nicely into the sort of safe and well side of things as well, thinking about people beyond fire risk, but the other vulnerabilities that people may have and other. So Jed, do you want to just give us a little bit about how we moved from purely home fire safety, it's just about fire, to thinking beyond that in the people's homes, and that reference you made earlier to Sam Stevens and the consensus statement? Just
certainly will.
Update.
And just in terms of direct response to that question, both myself and Mark sit on the NFCC's mental health board. Mark chairs the board, and we're working really hard to actually develop the evidence base and the database between what we consider to be the causal factors between poor mental health and increased exposure to fire. So you can find both myself and Mark on the NFCC website. If anybody's got any further questions on that, we're more than happy to actually answer it outside of this webinar, but I recognise time is short. So in terms of that, I think the challenge from Simon Stevens and the NHS was one was really sort of framed in terms of winter pressures. We took it a little bit further, and in 2015, we worked with Public Health England, NHS England, Age UK, the LGA, CFOA as it was at the time, which is now currently obviously the NFCC, to develop a consensus statement. And what that statement did is it set out a pledge from the sector to work together in terms of how fire can help improve health and well-being. As we previously mentioned, and the sort of figures for this year, so like not too far down, but we're increasingly across the threshold of some of the most vulnerable and at-risk individuals in our communities. So as well as spreading a fire prevention message, also to actually spread a message that links with sort of health and well-being. And if we look at that sort of crossover, if we look at frailty, we look at mobility, we look at smoking-related fires, we look at heating. Why is heating important to health? Respiratory health in terms of cold, damp homes, in exacerbating long-term conditions. The sorts of crossovers are really sort of remarkable in terms of what actually drives our fire fatalities are usually underpinned by a range of health and social care issues. And most of the people that we know that die in fires in a domestic setting are known to health and social care services. So there was a real sort of push at that time within our work for the Department of Communities and Local Health to actually develop that work. And the LGA really helped on this in terms of producing Beyond Fighting Fires, a public health approach in 2015. So the shared purpose was there. One of the issues, of being really honest with you, was actually making sure that we brought the entire sector with us, because the comment that we would always have back from the sector, and I think it's quite an accurate one, is that, well, we're not social workers, we're not mental health workers, we're firefighters. That's what we were recruited to do, and that's what we, up until recently, were specifically doing. So the job that we've had to do is both a cultural and behavioural one, to actually bring our workforce with us to understand the parity that prevention should have with both protection and with response, but at the same time to recognise that there are wider things at play, such as health and social care status and deprivation, that drive some of the fire risks that we see in the home. So that work has led us to where we we came back into the Home Office in 2016. And
so, Jed, before you trip us from 2016 onwards, just to that point there about working with other partners and all of the other factors that contribute to increased fire risk. One of our questions here says that one of the issues was about getting people through the door of the people who are vulnerable, and that fire service were more likely to be able to get over the threshold, which is a very interesting point, isn't it, about trust and the way in which firefighters are perceived by communities. So in terms of your sort of storytelling there, do you find that as well in terms of what if we look back to that period, that the trust that people had in fire made the big difference?
Very much so. I think the brand of fire and rescue services, and usually the fact that fire and rescue services are located in local communities and that people that work for fire and rescue services come from those very same local communities. So almost like speak the language of the people that they're crossing the threshold, are familiar with that. And it brings us back to where we went to with the person-centred framework in terms of moving away from just looking at a buildings approach to prevention to actually looking at a person-centred approach to prevention, understanding the lives that those people live, and talking to them in very sort of real language in terms of persuading them, in terms of behavioural change, how to modify some of their behaviours to actually improve their safety. And I think, regardless of sort of current developments within the sector, the brand of the sector is still very high, and it's actually a trading card for us to actually make sure that we do get across a lot of thresholds. So we don't suffer from the same issues that maybe other public sector workers suffer from in terms of trying to persuade people that some of the advice we give them is really in their own interest.
Yeah. So in terms of conversations, Andy, that you're having with people who are coming to Aico for the needs to deal with the risks that we've been talking about, have you noticed the change in terms of fire services, how they are using smoke alarms and developing their thinking about what should be in the home beyond that, perhaps? You find the conversation kind of evolved and changed over this period?
Yeah, I do agree exactly what Jed said and what you said, that the level of trust that is given. There is, with a lot of people, not dislike, that's possibly the wrong word, but smoke alarms they see as something which is ugly. They don't particularly want it on their ceiling. It could nuisance alarm. They don't want it going off when they're cooking the Sunday dinners and other things like that. And having the fire and rescue being able to go in, and it's an opportunity, whereas I know a lot of contractors and others who would be installing alarms on behalf of social landlords, private landlords, get a lot more pushback from what I believe. So it is a good opportunity, and it does lead. It's not just fire, obviously. It's not just installing alarms they do. There's the educational piece to it. There's the telecare. There's supported. There's all other areas where advice can come at. So yeah, I think it's a great position for education as well as just getting past that initial objection.
Yes, in fact, there's one of the recent questions that's come in actually talks about telecare. So it's interesting you mentioned that there, and it says that telecare enabled care, including smoke alarms, is growing rapidly in use as an efficient means of home care. Can the panel comment on why it remains unregulated and fire is often not considered as part of the risk? Is that something you can speak to, Andy, or one of our other panelists?
Happy to, and I'm sure Mark and Jed could probably come in as well on this one. But yeah, it is. I think we were aware that we're living in a aging population. There is a multiple requirements for people not only to want to live in their own home for longer and a desire to do that, but also to give the necessary tools to support people to live in their own homes for longer. Fire, as well as carbon monoxide and other risks in the property, are kind of fundamental, but a telecare system would normally go past that and install other home life safety devices. It could be fall alarms, pull cords, strobes, deaf and hard of hearing kits. There's all sorts of different devices that can aid in there, but I don't think it's going to go away. I can only see it's increasing really the requirements on that. And equally, I think technology has a big place to play in that field as well. I think a lot of these technologies haven't moved on in a good many years, and I think we've got a great opportunity now. Now we've got more connected devices, and I'm not just talking about alarms, we're talking about technology in the home in general. Now everything talks to the cloud and to one another. We're in a great opportunity to protect people in a more flexible way. It might be only a neighbour who wants to look after somebody. It might be their family. It might be a warden. It could be a landlord or the fire and rescue. So, yeah, good opportunity there.
Okay. So in terms of technology, just move away from telecare momentarily. In terms of smoke alarm availability, so if you look at Survey of English Housing, it talks about ownership being incredibly high at 93%. Now, when we did our briefing, we had a bit of a chat about this, and there was some cynicism on the panel about whether this figure was about right. So, Jed, you were a bit cynical about this. So, what do you think? What does that number not tell the whole story about ownership?
In terms of the household survey, I think no. If I'm putting my sort of neck on the block, I think the figures.
Why do you think that?
Far too high. Well, we mentioned the online home fire safety check, and we decided to look at a sample of the referrals that we get through. So we looked between July 2021 and May 2024. We did an analysis of home fire safety check dates on smoke alarm installation. Of the 75,554 referrals we looked at, there were 37,862 with no smoke detection or no working smoke detection. I think that's a useful clarification. People may have smoke detection, whether it's working smoke detection.
Well, yes, we're not talking about maintenance. Yeah, this is purely about having them.
Purely about having them, which I think is, okay. And Andy will know better than I do in terms of people under the perception that they've got working smoke detection. Probably not got effective working smoke detection. Rather worryingly, we'd expect in terms of very high risk, maybe the figures to be higher. So there were 20 of that figure, 37,862, 20% of them were what we consider to be sort of very high risk. So totally within our remit to go in and fit that sort of smoke detection. And 49% were high as well. So that's 69%. But 31% were what we consider to be in a low risk category. So those won't be necessary people we would visit. And if you're looking at that, then you're looking at the potential for us, and I think we've discussed this before, the potential for us for growing a generation of individual or households that probably haven't got the same cultural appreciation of the importance of smoke detection. And we're 20 years on since our initial sort of input. Probably the rallying call should be, should we look at the inoculation of homes again with modern smoke detection going forward? Smoke detection doesn't stop a fire happening, but it saves lives because it tells us a fire is happening.
Absolutely. So, Mark, in terms of the cash that you got all those years ago, which was a portion of 25 million, which probably wouldn't buy much these days, probably. Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think there should be kind of like a revisiting of it to boost it again? Are we? I mean, presumably, all those 10-year alarms that were installed in 2004 are well out of date. So you must have been back to them and have a program of revisits. But then there's all the people who are absent. If this figure isn't right, then there's still lots of people who don't have them. So how do we deal with that? How do we pay for it?
Yeah, so the story is probably a bit worse than the one that you paint in 2004. Rather than us installing 10-year alarms, we installed 1-year alarms in some respects.
Oh, okay.
So that gives you immediate problems within 12 months. So yeah, you know, it's something that you need to be on top of. In terms of the funding and the financing around that, the whole prevention agenda, I took a conversation with our head of finance, and it was less than 2%. We used to fork out on prevention in its entirety 20 years ago. You know, fast forward to today, it's above 5%, which is going in the right direction. But you know, as a head of prevention and as someone in the strategic leaders who is concerned about keeping people alive, you know, that opens up the conversation. Well, you know, how far do we go in terms of, you know, taking budget away from other areas of the business to put them into prevention, particularly given that we're now able to evidence, you know, through some robust evaluation, that the prevention strategies work. So there must come a point in that case that we do start saying, you know what, this works, we can prove that it works, so start funding us better so that we can make it work better. So really important.
Is that going to go into your, will it go into your spending review bid when that comes around? More money for smoke alarms?
Potentially, you know, that's a conversation, isn't it, at that level? And you know, it's funny, we've been through CRMP planning very recently, and we're starting to have these conversations, start to evaluate you know, before the CRMP is actually discussed and published, we start to think about, you know, what is that the best value that we're giving for the members of the public? And similarly, that should happen across the industry. You know, we need to look what is best value for members of the community, and certainly all of the things that we talked about here today do indicate that prevention works. And it's funny actually, you know, because I was asked a question by an inspectorate service liaison lead probably 6 or 7 years ago, and it was that the question was, does this work? Do your plans work? Does your strategy work? And the answer is, yeah, it does. And then I'm asked, well, so you're keeping people alive? And I'm like, well, yeah. And the question then is, prove it. Mm-hmm. And it's a really difficult position to be in, you know. And I responded. I said, I can't prove it here and now. I said, but if I stop doing it, come back in 5 years and let's take a look. So the
way in that position.
Exactly, this is it. And the way to move that forward is to get that data, to evaluate the evidence that we've got, and build on that evaluation that we can take.
Absolutely, that data point's really strong in terms of you need to have good quality data. You need to be consistent. You need to be adding it all together across the country, so all services are counting the same thing in the same way, and using that to drive a national business case back to Home Office to say, give us some more cash. So that's my tip for today. So Andy, let me come back to the English Housing Survey question. So you too are cynical about the figure. Why is that?
We do have data that's coming from the survey, but I don't think I question its accuracy from what we see, what we hear from contractors, from landlords, from the legislation very recently occurred up in Scotland, Northern Ireland, in the process of introducing legislation, not quite to Scottish levels, but it does apply to private landlords, so that's having a big impact over there. And yeah, we're just not seeing anywhere near the number of properties protected with smoke alarms to what the survey is suggesting. And again, on Jed's excellent point regarding working fire detection, if you look at the fire and rescue statistics, whether you look at Scotland, England, whichever stats you look at, there goes my light conveniently again. Sustainability. But you look at any of the statistics, and there's always a high number of fires present, fires where there's non-working alarm present, and that most commonly will be down to a battery-only replaceable unit. So I mentioned Scotland's now gone for these long-life tamper-proof seals. The building reg promotes a mains-powered alarm with a battery backup. So you either got dual power source, or if you've only got one power source, it's a long life tamper-proof one, and they're resilient. They're really, really good. The moment you have a single battery that needs to be replaced periodically, frustrating is likely to start beeping through the middle of the night. It's just the way it is. So people either don't have a battery, or they'll take it down because of a nuisance, and there are methods to silence them temporarily, but yeah, it's for that reason. We don't even manufacture replaceable battery alarms, battery-only alarms, exactly for that reason. I accept that they probably do fit a certain price point in the market, but if you look at the stats, I don't think it's weighted strong enough for that. But so yeah, it's a really good point. I do think we can be more accurate with that.
Okay, so this leads me on to the final bit of our session today, because we're coming towards the end. It's been fascinating, but we always seem to run out of time. So in terms of that next steps though, so Andy, I'll come back to you in terms of future gazing. So if we have a situation where we really want to get rid of, you know, these 1-year alarms and stop the people being able to take batteries out, which I think is not a new thing, and we really want people to test them, so that's good, but that we haven't really got into testing today, but that's certainly an issue in itself in terms of behaviour. But in terms of thinking about the future and about what, you know, if we would say 20 years time, if we all came back looking slightly older, what would it look like? What does your future gazing tell us about the future of home fire safety when it comes to either the physical alarms or the practice or the behaviour? What does your future look like? So I'll come to you, Andy.
Okay, I was about to ask you who that was to first.
Yes, I was going to follow up, because you talked a little bit about technology change. So is it a technology thing for you, or is it a behaviour thing?
I can see all sorts of areas. From the technology side of things, I think we're going to see more and more technology within just one individual alarm. People don't want multiple devices on their ceiling. ideally they want less than one, but so yeah, trying to get as much technology into that one device. So I think it'll be a lot better at detecting broader range of fires. They'll be a lot better at minimizing nuisance alarms. Another area where we're seeing more in the industry is with technologies such as AI, machine learning, IoT, the connected solutions, so we can get signals off-site a lot easier than we used to be able to do.
Okay, it's like a remote thing. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So that not only gives information to third-party supporters, wardens, fire and rescue. It gives information to a landlord to make sure that the alarms are functioning correctly, or within date, or maybe need replacing in the next 2-3 years, or anything like that. Have mains power, so you can get all that kind of data. And I think we're going to start seeing, or I hope that's where we're going to see. And with more and more technology in the head, it may not necessarily just be fire. There's plenty of other technologies. Indoor air quality is a big one. Carbon monoxide is an obvious one that fire and rescue fit as well, of course. And then I would like to think that the complicated mess that we have between legislation differing throughout the country and being different to the regulations and being different to the British standards, I hope we kind of follow what Scotland's done, which is brought the minimum level up, reduce that complexity, and just introduce the level playing field where everybody's equally protected. So that's what I would like to see. But
right, your future is there's a lot of elements to that. Let's see if it's in the future for Mark. So Mark, what does 20 years time, when you are reclining in your retirements, what would you like the fire service to be doing?
I like your confidence there, Catherine. Thank you.
You're not still going to be there in 20 years.
Fingers crossed. I'd really like to see a professionalism in prevention, and we work in this industry that it's absolutely professional. So firefighters who are going into buildings, who are wearing breathing apparatus, compartment fires, into water. There's a set of competencies around that. You've got to be professional to do that, and rightly so. And I'd like to see something similar in respect to prevention, and we are moving in the right direction. 600,000 visits you mentioned earlier per year. That's an awful lot of opportunities to get over the threshold of somebody's home. And you're absolutely right. The conversation earlier talked about the trusted brand of the fire and rescue service. We are different. We are unique. We're not, and I do apologise to anyone on the call who's from these sectors, but we're not police, we're not health, we're not education, we're not parents. We have a unique relationship with our communities where we are able to land these messages. We've talked a lot about smoke alarms today as well. Not everything in terms of home safety is smoke alarm. A lot of it is about education of people. It's about talking, it's about interacting, and it's about using that brand that we have to almost sell what a fire safe home looks like. So I would really and dearly like to see prevention being professionalised over the course of the next 5, 10, 15 years, Catherine.
Excellent, thank you. And Jed, to you, what does your 20-year future look like when it comes to home fire safety?
Hopefully walking the dogs.
Walking the dogs. But when you're looking back at the service in Greater Manchester, would you like to be doing?
Happens, I'll pick up on one of Andy's points. I think that there's a pressing need to resolve the healthy but also unhelpful to UK fire and rescue services divergence across the evolution, because that makes our job really sort of difficult. Makes Andy's job almost impossible to actually have that sort of piece across there. Leadership from the sector, I think, is a real key issue for us in terms of stability of leadership from the sector, which I think is really improved. And now we probably just need leadership from a government. If I'm being controversial, I would say that we've been sat on a dormant white paper for a number of years now. So I think that the time is right for us to do that. I think really I draw some real comparisons to the work of Lord Darcy within the NHS. And I firmly believe that in terms of what we've discussed here, in terms of technology, so tech-enabled care will drive the sector. It will drive the way we fight fires, but increasingly it will drive the way we prevent fires. I would also see in terms of prevention being the key issue and taking its rightful place. And I'd like to come back and I'd like to be able to sort of see Mark's service spend more than 5% which is not a criticism of the service, because coming from where it started, it's an uplift. But seeing parity across prevention, protection and response. And I suppose lastly, I think the other issue is in terms of our changing demographic, but also the way that we deliver public services. And a key line within the Darcy 10-year plan is care closer to home. Still, the depressing fact is the vast majority of people that die in fires across the UK die in fires in their own home.
Yeah.
And if we're going to use our homes increasingly to deliver a range of other services, there's a real sort of impetus for us as a sector to be involved in that sort of design process going forward, so we can actually maybe not stop fire risk, but we can mitigate fire risk going forward. So I think, as ever, it's an exciting time for us, but some challenges still there.
Yeah, absolutely. Goodness, what an interesting list of things. Normally, because we've run out of time, I knew this would happen, that I would normally ask you for one piece of advice, but actually I think our future gazing is your advice. So all the things that you've talked about there around legislation, the better use of data, around professionalising things, about aligning with other strategic directions in terms of Lord Darcy and the healthcare report that he did, which I'd recommend reading if anybody wants to, and a bit more cash. So I think all of that, plus that leadership piece and getting it in front of the Home Office, in front of ministers as an important thing, because there's so many other priorities, is something for everybody to go away and have a chat with their colleagues about the senior leadership teams, and think about how that then all integrates into your own sort of planning for the future. So hopefully people will take all those pieces of advice, and it will stimulate some real discussion in and around the fire service and other people on the call who've been watching us as well. So not just fire service, but those working in social housing, in protection, fire protection areas. So I think plenty of food for thought. We have, I'm afraid, run out of time. It's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed it because fire prevention has always been my first love. So I was very, very pleased to do this one with you today. Thank you so much, Jed, Mark and Andy, for joining us today. I'm going to do my summary now. So you will disappear off into the wings. So that just leaves me to thank you all for watching today, and to thank our speakers who've done an excellent job bringing it all together in this really interesting discussion. The webinar will be available to watch on catch up via our website. As soon as I finish, it's available, so you can watch it again if you want to. Any notes on the webinar will be hosted there as well. There's a link there at the bottom to Aico, our sponsor for this episode. You'll receive CPD accreditation either straight away or at the end of the month, so before. And our next webinar is on the 14th of November. We'll be starting a series of 4, so look out for those. We'll be covering a range of topics: multi-channel communication with the public, apprenticeships, biodiversity, net gain, and resilience of IT networks. So quite a varied mix there. So do register, visit our website, merseyside.com. Make sure you sign up for our weekly and daily digests. And it just leaves me to say thank you very much for watching.